When we bring up the subject of God as one who gives us safe shelter, we sit at a critical crossroads. We sit at the intersection of two divergent roads. The one road is God as comforter, provider, protector. Quite understandably, we find this road a precious path to cling to. When storms of life buffet us to and fro, when we feel threatened, at risk of losing ourselves or losing our life, when we are under attack by enemies, the metaphor of God as provider of safe shelter is a metaphor we run to and find greatly comforting. The epitome, the prime example of this notion of God was in our gospel reading this morning, when Jesus spoke tenderly about himself, or you might say about God as a mother hen who longs to gather her chicks under her wing when a predator comes along. We also find biblical images along this line in the Psalms of comfort, such as Psalm 91. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Or today's Psalm 27, certainly one of my favorites, one I often turn to in my rocky adolescence. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So that's one road, God who comforts and protects. The other road is equally important and equally true, but it runs perpendicular to the first one. This is the God of the hard road, the God of the narrow, winding, uphill path fraught with danger, where risking life is not only a possibility, it is assumed. Jesus also gave us a paradigm, a prime example for this road. Its metaphor is an instrument of torture and death. Whoever wants to be my disciple must take up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it. So we can't get very far into a sermon on God's safe shelter without asking a very complicated question. What is safety? What is safety? I want to talk about that question in light of our contemporary use of the term safety, because in fact we talk a lot about being safe, so it bears some examination. But first I want to ask that question of these texts for the day. What does a God who offers us safe shelter really mean by that? If it's the same God that's asking us to give up our lives for the sake of the gospel. Let me start with Jesus and his mother hen metaphor. In Luke 13, Jesus' sworn enemies, the religious leaders, came to his aid. They warned him of what would happen if he got any closer to Jerusalem. Jesus was working in and around Galilee, well away from Jerusalem, but the Pharisees, to their credit, told Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." The Pharisees were not fans of Jesus, but there was someone else that they despised even more, and that was King Herod. Jesus responded to the Pharisees' warning in a way that must have confused them. "Go tell that fox, Herod, I'm casting out demons and healing today and tomorrow. Try to kill me if you wish, but I'm too busy to run. I will not run from Galilee, and furthermore, I will come to Jerusalem itself, the city that kills its prophets and stones those sent to it. The Pharisees couldn't fathom Jesus' reckless desire to walk straight into the front line and choose the path of certain suffering. Jesus tried to explain, it is for the love of Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, how often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. But whether you accept me or not, I am coming to you. I will be with you in your time of distress. I will stand in for you. I will come between you and your attacker, that fox king. I will be your fierce, protective mother hen, if you're willing. Now, you, dear congregation, can ponder and decide whether, in fact, this metaphor holds up as real protection against real attack. In the face of a large predator, fox, wolf, coyote, a laying hen is not much of a match. Yeah, she'll put up an energetic fight. On some days, she might even persuade the predator to find an easier target. But when it comes down to it, the jaws and claws of a hungry canine will make quick work of the hen, exposing the helpless chicks hiding underneath. So what does this metaphor actually guarantee us? Rescue? No. Assured survival? No. But accompaniment? Yes. Presence and advocacy? Absolutely yes. And now let's take a look at that odd and disturbing text from Genesis. Is this even about safety? It's a weird and troubling story full of blood and gore. It could be a scene from a horror movie. But actually, it's a scene that makes perfect sense in the culture of the ancient Near East. In ancient times, binding contracts did not look like ours. They weren't written out on 8.5 by 14 paper with lots of words and legalese, signed and dated with ink in triplicate. But anyone in the ancient Near East would have immediately recognized this gory scene as a covenant ritual that made agreements binding on both parties. First, a quick review of Abram. Back when Abram was settled in the land of his ancestors, he was the heir apparent to vast land holdings, I'm sure, but God told him to pack up everything, and leave. Didn't say where, just said go. And gave him a promise that one day he would be a great nation with numberless descendants. That was back in chapter 12 of Genesis. Now it's chapter 15, decades later, and here's how Abram's new life has unfolded. Still living in tents, camped outside Canaan because its fierce inhabitants won't let him in. A famine hits the land, and he goes down to Egypt for a while to beg for food. His wife, Sarai, can't get pregnant and is now past childbearing age, making God's promise of descendants kind of a non-starter. He did succeed in business and got wealthy in flocks and herds, but no son to give it to, so it doesn't mean much in that culture. No great nation on the horizon. So, the promise of God, for the sake of which Abram gave up everything, that promise remains entirely unfulfilled. And no hope on the horizon. Everything hinges on one thing: offspring. Now an impossibility. This is Abram in chapter 15 when God shows up again and God cuts a covenant with him. That's the actual verb, cuts a covenant. When important agreements were made in those days, animals were brought, their carcasses cut in two. The two halves placed opposite each other in a line, one half lined up here and one half lined up here. And in the middle, blood flowed from those carcasses, forming a small river, commonly called a blood path. Then the two parties to the covenant walk between those two lines. The party with the superior rank walks first, and the second party then walks after that. They walk the blood path, saying by that, if I break my part of the covenant, may what happened to these animals happen to me. Serious stuff. So the covenant ritual is set up in Genesis 15. And it says, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and a deep and terrifying darkness descended upon him. This is by far the lowest point in Abram's life. God's promise is out of reach, and he is struck unconscious, enveloped by a deep and terrifying darkness. Now, if this ritual unfolded as expected, God would have walked down the blood path, then Abram would have. That's not what happened. In the moment that Abram was incapacitated by terror, God walked down the blood path twice. Once for himself and once for Abram. At least that's how many scholars interpret this, and that interpretation makes wonderful sense to me. Genesis 15:17 says that a smoking firepot and a flaming torch, both symbols of divine presence, passed through the middle of the carcasses, one after the other. In the midst of Abram's terror, God stood in for him. God stood in. God got between Abram and that which terrorized him. Sounds like safety to me. But what kind of safety exactly? Rescue? No. Guaranteed success? No. But accompaniment? Yes. Willingness to stand in your stead? Absolutely yes. I'm grateful we worship a God who is with us. I can't imagine a world, and I don't think I even want to, where everything goes my way because I worship the right God or do the right things. There's something more profoundly beautiful, I think, about a God who gets down in the muck with us and is willing to stand in for us, to face the same threats we face and not abandon us in it. I think I'm actually able to love such a God more than one who flips switches from the distance and makes everything work out for the faithful. So that raises the more contemporary question of what safety should look like for all of God's children, especially the most vulnerable ones. So what is safety, and who defines it? Do we, who are members of the powerful class, get to define safety for those who are on the underside of the system? Because that's what usually happens. Marginalized or threatened people and their advocates raise objection about unsafe environments or words, and then we hear the counter-accusation that someone is being a snowflake, that someone can't handle a little tough talk and criticism, whether it's persons of color who experience actions of law enforcement differently than I do, or whether it's persons in the LGBTQ community or in the Me Too movement, or others with experiences I can't fully understand, or if it's asylum seekers at the border threatened at home in ways that we know nothing about, or undocumented immigrants in our own neighborhood who keep their trauma to themselves, and the examples can go on and on and on. There's often conversation around the notion of safety. And those of us on the upper side of the power structure often have a hard time getting it. We look at specific words and personal actions of ours and we think, well, I'm not threatening them. I respect them as people. I may be expressing ideas they don't like or agree with, but I'm not doing them a harm. How can they say I'm not safe? Well, if someone is not feeling safe around me, it probably has less to do with my actual specific words and gestures and actions that I am speaking or doing at that moment, and more to do with underlying harms, more to do with the strength of our relationship and depth of trust that already exists or already doesn't exist, apart from any of my specific words or deeds. But we are so quick to lob words at each other without regard to the dynamics that lie underneath those words. So when people march under the banner Black Lives Matter, someone thinks they need to counter with an All Lives Matter sign. No one argues with the truth of that statement, but when that sign is being held by someone of privilege or power, that only proves how tone deaf they are to the real impact of generational trauma and injustice. Think about it. If persons in power or the systems have, in the past, been repeatedly oppressive and discriminatory, or if the people on the margins who are worried about their safety regularly live with a higher degree of risk of attack, or have been traumatized by powerful people and systems, then we who are in the power position, no matter how kind or well-meaning we are personally, we need to be slow to try to make an argument that we are in fact safe. So there's no need to worry. It's far too easy for us who are members of the power class to define away our own words and deeds as safe. We may indeed have a pure heart with no intent to injure. That's not the point. We may believe we are being entirely nonviolent. That's not the point. We may indeed be able to make a rational argument that our particular words or deeds are, by definition, safe and non-threatening. That's not the point. Someone on Jeopardy, just a few days ago, while they were chatting with Alex Trebek, talked about why they did not learn how to ride a bicycle until they were in their 30s. It was because, this contestant revealed, that at age 5, his foot got caught in the spokes of his bicycle. And he just didn't feel safe on a bicycle until he took lessons from a professional in his adulthood. Yes, I believe there probably is such a thing as a snowflake. There may well be persons who, beyond reason, live in mortal fear of any kind of challenge or critique. There are some who seem to need to be coddled, but it's not really ours to say whether their need to be coddled is legitimate or not. It does no one any good to stand at a distance and call people derogatory names. We don't know the real reason for their negative reactions to critique until we establish some trust, until we engage with respect and deep listening over a long period of time. Maybe their feet got caught in the spokes dozens of times. Yet, how often have I heard persons across the political spectrum from left to right, and how often have I myself attached a value descriptor to someone, calling them snowflake, redneck, hater, coward, without ever having encountered them human to human in a context where both parties were given a chance to ensure their safety on their own terms. So I think maybe this is where today's scripture can help us. If we want to express safety, maybe we should do it the way God does. How does God express safety? In God's effort to build a relationship with us, God stands in. God sees our vulnerability. God accepts that we have little to go on that gives us confidence to enter such a huge covenant. God gets our limited point of view. So rather than demand more than we are capable of giving, God just stands in on our behalf. Even before we have a chance to hesitate or ask for a reprieve, God says, I'm all in. Just watch me. And in the gospel text, this image of God or Jesus as mother hen, the protection offered is not top-down or patronizing. It's the love of a mother. Invitational, non-coercive, based on being family together. The offer of safety is extended as an invitation, not coerced. How often have I longed to gather you, but I'm willing to wait. The offer of safety is just that, an offer to lean into the relationship, an assurance that we are all in it together. No one is purposely left behind. And if you're not ready, I'll love and respect you anyway, God says, and consider you family. Thanks be to God. Let us hear again the comforting words of the psalmist from Psalm 27 and confess our need, our hunger for the God who is with us always.